My story started when I was 8 years old. I was assaulted by a family member, and that continued for 5 years. I kept it a secret. I thought I was a bad girl, but I didn't actually know what was happening to me. And through the process of going through therapy and just contemplating the position that I would have been in as an 8-year-old girl, I can see that at the time there was no language, which is why I had no understanding. I was not able to cognitively understand what was happening to me because I had no language, and without language I had no voice. There was no such thing when I was growing up, and for people who are my age and older, there was no such thing as sex education. So what was happening to me was a complete mystery, and all I knew was that I felt really bad and that I must be really bad for this to be happening. And from then on, I always had a mantra in my head that worse things happen to other people, and that I was really lucky as I got older because it didn't affect me. And I always thought I was so lucky that it didn't affect me. I went on to live my life. I was always a good girl. I did very well at school. I was a good daughter, became a good wife and a good mum. And then a few things happened in my life where my life fell apart. And that's where I found that what happened to me as a child did affect me. And it affected me very badly. I became very sick very quickly. But it was a very, very lengthy, very intensive and very difficult process to get to where I am today. The first time I told someone, I think, because I do have memory problems, but I think it was my mother when I was about 15, and I actually don't remember her response. I told my husband when we got married, but not very much detail, but he knew that I had been abused as a child. But because I believed that it hadn't affected me, the first person that I actually told in detail what happened was the counsellor that I had. I was very lucky. And I guess this is the only part where I get emotional with my story is when I talk about my counsellor, the first counsellor that I had, because she saved my life. She was, I can't describe the debt that I felt towards her. She was a safe place where that little 8-year-old was able to come out. Carolyn always believed in me. She always believed that I would survive. And the reason I would survive was because I always asked for help. Sometimes I begged for help. And when I say begged, I mean I truly, truly begged for help. It was really scary because I'd been so sick. I was very frightened that once we took the lid off, that I might not be able to control it. And I had been through so much and was so ill and in so much pain that I was really scared to recognise that 8-year-old that was still there waiting, because I felt like I couldn't look after her and deal with her pain too, and that I shouldn't have to do that. The therapy has been something that has not only given me the tools to be able to survive and the tools to be able to deal with depression, but it's given me the understanding. And every time I have understood something, I have been able to make a move forward, steps forward. And that's been critical for me to be able to learn and to cognitively process what's happened in my past and where it all fits and what has happened to my brain and why I think the way that I do, why I feel the way that I do. It's affected me in many ways, not just psychologically, but physically and physiologically. Things like I have lived in a state of hypervigilance all my life, and that's just normal for me. But it's really good for me to have learnt that that isn't the state in which most people live. And I understand now why I can get so very, very tired, because it's very exhausting living in a state of hypervigilance. What I have learnt is common also is that digestive disorders are very prevalent amongst people who have endured trauma. The first time I was admitted to hospital for bladder infections, I was 10 years old. I went on to have digestive problems. I've had a third of my bowel removed. I understand now why I can't have, I don't like people touching my hair, why I can't have bedding, clothing, sheets and things, I can't have them over my face. And I sometimes, although not very much now, thankfully, but would experience severe panic attacks. But as I say, thankfully, through therapy and working through why that happens, it happens less and less. But when it happens, and I cognitively know it's happening, it is nonetheless less terrifying. But it all has gone together to make me who I am, and I'm proud of who I am. I am. I have no hate towards the perpetrator. Hate, that's a very strong word and a very strong emotion. For me, probably the only hate that I had was towards myself going through this process, and the story that has been my life has involved me going through stages where I desperately hated myself for the position I found myself in. If someone else had done to my daughters or granddaughter what was done to me, I would more than hate. I would more than hate. I have read a lot about forgiveness, and I read a lot about it because I have heard that that's the way that you can move forward, that you're not actually saying that it's okay, that what happened to you was okay, but you are letting it go. The concept of forgiveness, it doesn't sit well with me. I can't say I forgive him for what he did. No, I don't. I'm not carrying the negative emotions anymore. I don't carry the bitterness. I don't carry the anger, but I don't forgive. No, I don't forgive. I shared my story with my family. Not all the details. No one knows all the details. But sharing the story was difficult in that it all sort of bubbled up at the same time as me becoming sick, because it was all very closely linked. So sharing the story was all part of me developing a mental illness as well. So for my family, I went from being a happy, functioning mum, just doing all the things that I did. I had a career, to being a mum who was in a psychiatric hospital, curled up in a fetal position, crying for weeks on end. So sharing the story was all part of my family and closest friends also being immersed in it. Because they had no understanding either of what was happening to me. They didn't understand about depression. They didn't understand about mental illness. None of us knew what was happening. And a psychiatric facility, a psychiatric hospital can be a scary place because the unknown is scary. There's a lot of sadness. And I lost friends because they weren't comfortable to come and visit me in a psychiatric unit. And I understand the fear, I understand the unknown. I was frightened being in a psychiatric unit. So sharing the story was all wound up and caught up with being ill as well. I would like to share my story because I know that when I do, people give me feedback that it has made a big difference to them to be able to see that you can be very damaged, you can be very ill on two levels. So for me, it was from the sexual abuse, but also from having then manifesting itself into mental illness, that you can survive it, that you can ask for help, that it's not a weakness. It's not a weakness. That for mental illness, asking for help, people like myself try to hide it. We wear a mask until the energy that it takes to keep that mask on sometimes surpasses the energy that it takes to be alive, and it gets out of balance. But if you ask for help and if you know what's happening, I think for me, if I'd known what depression was, if I'd known about the effects of child abuse, I would have had a better understanding of what was happening. And I may not have got so ill. So I think sharing my story, but also dispelling the secrecy about child abuse and the shame, because all secrecy breeds is shame and guilt. That's all it does. It gives a voice to the people who are voiceless and to the children who are voiceless. And there is nothing more disempowering than not having a voice. And to lose that, to have that taken away, is very wrong. It's very wrong. And so I'm using my voice now. It took 40 years to find it, so I want to use it, and I want to not be ashamed. I would tell her that she's a good girl and that she's done nothing wrong. I would tell her that she didn't deserve that she deserved to be looked after. She deserved to be protected, as all children deserve to be looked after and to be protected and to be kept safe. She deserved that, and that was denied her by the adults that should have been protecting her. I would tell her that I love her, and she's a very special, very clever little girl.